Welcome to International Forum. Today our program is about China. With 1.3 billion people, China is the world's most populous country. China is also one of the world's fastest growing and changing countries. The term rising China has become ubiquitous in media reports and scholarly writings on China both here and abroad. In 2010, China is expected to become the world's second largest economy after the United States. China's first quarter 2010 GDP grew by 11.9%, and its expected growth for the year 2010 is 9.5%. China is the world's biggest net exporter, with this year's forecast current account balance of $291 billion. And as part of the large government economic stimulus package in response to the global financial crisis, the Chinese have invested a lot of money in infrastructure building. In the past 2 years, according to a recent report in the Financial Times, China's roadwork could rival that of the United States within a decade. To help us better understand the significance of China's rise and how America is and should be dealing with this challenge and opportunity is our honored guest today, China scholar and policy expert Thomas Christensen. Tom Christensen is professor of politics and international affairs and co-director of the China and the World program at Princeton University. From 2006 to 2008, Professor Christensen served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian Affairs in the Bush administration. He is a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and in 2002 received a Distinguished Public Service Award from the United States Department of State. Please join me in welcoming Tom Christensen to our program today. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you very much, May. It's a great pleasure to be here.
It's wonderful to have you back.
It's always nice to see you.
Yeah. When you were in the government, you couldn't appear on the program, so it's wonderful to have you back. You were in China in March. Can you tell us about that trip? Were you on a diplomatic mission?
I was on what's called a Track 1.5 dialogue, and what a 1.5 dialogue is a dialogue that includes government officials and includes academics and former government officials in the same dialogue. So the U.S. government had some representation there, and I served as an outside expert along with former National Security Advisor Stephen Hadley and Ambassador Richard Solomon, who used to be the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, and we were the non-government members of our entourage, and we had several State Department officials and Defense Department officials in our team.
So this is the strategic and economic dialogue of the United States and China. This is the thing that we read about in the papers.
No, it's not, May. The strategic and economic dialogue is a purely governmental dialogue that is run by Secretary Clinton at the State Department and Secretary Geithner at Treasury, and they meet their Chinese counterparts in a very large meeting. Those used to be in two separate sections. There was a senior dialogue on security affairs run out of the State Department by my boss at the time, Deputy Secretary Negroponte. And there was a strategic economic dialogue run out of Treasury, run by Secretary Paulson. I participated in both of those, but they were separate in the last administration. What this administration has done is combine them into one very large dialogue that involves both security and economic affairs and involves many ministers on the Chinese side.
Okay, we'll come to that later. Now, you go to China on a regular basis. I'd like you to tell us, as you see it, take the pulse of the country for us. Your last few trips, what do you see are the significant, important changes, both good and bad?
I think that there's a growing sense of China's importance in the world in China. There's a recognition that China plays a larger role, and there's always been a desire for China to play a larger role on the international stage. And I think what I noticed this year in March was that there were perhaps some false expectations about the United States that had been proven to be incorrect. So it was a period of some disappointment in China about the U.S.-China relationship. And I think it's related to the Chinese elites, the academics, the government officials' view of China's place in the world and how the United States should treat China. And early this year, the United States adopted a few policies that are fairly normal policies for the United States to raise and have been raised for decades. But there was a rather strong reaction in China to these policies, and arguably a reaction that was stronger than the reaction normally is. And those policies are arms sales to Taiwan, the president meeting with the Dalai Lama as a religious figure in a private capacity, and of course then the difficulties over Google and the problems that Google ran into and some of the statements made by top State Department officials about media freedom and internet freedom. So those three things in combination led some in China to worry about U.S.-China relations in a way that I think reflects their false and excessive expectations for a change in policy under the new administration and after the financial crisis.
So, but yeah, I remember reading the papers in those days, the first part of 2010. Indeed, it was very tense. But things, they have gone better, have they
yes.
not? And we can talk about that more later.
Yes.
Now let us look at sort of the what international issues of common concern do the United States and China share?
Well, it's hard to think of a major international issue in the security realm or the economic realm or in the environmental realm that is not a shared interest of the United States and China.
Some examples?
Some examples would be obviously global warming, an issue that will affect all of us, and an issue that the United States and China are very important players in because we are the two largest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world. So any solution will have to involve Sino-American cooperation and, of course, the cooperation of many others. On the economic front, obviously, if we want to create a globe with greater financial stability, all countries will have to contribute. And China did have a rather robust stimulus package that you mentioned in your excellent introduction. And I think that China has, in that sense, done a lot to provide an engine of growth in a period of hard times by issuing its own stimulus package when the global economy had a downturn. On the security front, we used to argue when I was in the State Department that no country has benefited from global stability and globalization of the economy more than China has since 1978, when China opened up to the international arena economically and politically. And I think that that's true. So China has a huge stake in global security. So if you think of something like nuclear proliferation, China really has no stake in seeing nuclear weapons or nuclear technologies proliferate around the world, because that will cause instability in this international realm from which China has benefited so greatly.
Was that part of why they actually were very, very helpful in the six-country talk with the North Korea nuclear issue?
I think that's true. I think in the six-party talks on North Korea, China played a much more constructive role than many people could have expected who were China experts looking at China, say, 10 or 15 years ago. The idea that China would host a multilateral setting, would help draft UN Security Council resolutions with sanctions against their former ally, and would help pressure North Korea during the talks to come to the table and be more constructive, I think would have been hard to predict 10 or 15 years ago. And China has played a very constructive role, and I participated in 2 rounds of the six-party talks on North Korean denuclearization. And I saw the Chinese at an abstract level and at a very concrete level play a constructive role. Of course, the talks haven't produced the results that we would all like, but that's a separate question than whether China was playing a constructive role, and I think it was. But there are other examples where China needs to do a lot more. And on an issue like Iran, arguably China has not been as helpful as it could be. And we need to encourage China to understand where China's own interests lie in that region of the world, and to understand that a nuclear Iran will be a destabilizing force in an energy-rich region on which we all depend for stable prices. And I think there's some increasing recognition of this in China. It's a slow process. And the evolution of Chinese activity on security affairs, multilateral security affairs, is an evolution. It takes time to get China to move from where it was, which was a place where China was very reluctant to engage in multilateral security solutions and really help pull the weight that needs to be pulled to solve these problems and really pitch in. China was very reluctant to do that. It's been doing more of it, but it's a slow process of trying to encourage China to do more and more. And China needs to do more if we're going to solve these problems.
Yeah. You know, I'd like to ask this question about disagreements, areas of disagreement between the United States and China, which you alluded to earlier, that resulted in really tense relations earlier in 2010. The question of Dalai Lama and Taiwan. These are issues that at this stage, though, seems to have no solution, because China will not change its position, and the United States. Well, the question really is, what role should the United States play?
Well, I think the United States did the right thing earlier this year when we decided to sell a tranche of weapons to Taiwan, defensive weapons that will help Taiwan negotiate with the mainland from a position of strength. And I think that the president did the right thing by seeing the Dalai Lama as a religious leader. He doesn't see him in the capacity of a political leader. He sees him as a religious leader. And if you think about the Dalai Lama's positions on various issues, they're entirely consistent with the U.S. position. For example, the Dalai Lama opposes the use of violence to pursue better conditions and civil liberties for the Tibetan people. He also does not seek Tibetan independence, something many Americans do not know.
Right.
He's looking for religious freedom and civil liberties in Tibet, something that we very much stand for.
Right.
And the U.S. policy, and I don't represent the U.S. government on this show, and I should make that very clear, everything I say is my own view, but the U.S. government official position is that Tibet is part of the People's Republic of China. So the U.S. doesn't push for independence, and to the degree the Dalai Lama doesn't as well, there's really no reason for the United States to back down to Chinese pressure and say we shouldn't see this very honorable gentleman who has sought a peaceful solution to the many problems that the Tibetan people face. So I think they did the right thing on both scores. Of course, this leads to a reaction in China. And what we need to do on the Taiwan piece is to explain the basis of our policy, that when we sell weapons to Taiwan, it is not to encourage Taiwan to seek formal diplomatic independence. It is not to encourage any change.
Which they're not under the present government.
The current government in Taiwan has been very moderate toward the mainland, and the U.S. does not support Taiwan independence, and the U.S. does not. The U.S. opposes any unilateral change to the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. So we've made that clear to both sides that on Taiwan, we don't want to see Taiwan adopting unnecessarily provocative diplomatic or political strategies that will only serve to exacerbate tensions across the strait and not achieve any of the pro-independence goals that might be sought at the time. And we tell the mainland that the mainland should reduce the military deployments across from Taiwan and eschew threats of force or actual use of force in cross-strait relations. And that's a position that we maintain for decades, and I think it's a very constructive position. As part of that policy, we sell weapons to Taiwan, and I think we need to convey in a convincing fashion to the mainland that this is actually a policy that runs consistent with the desires of all three actors in cross-strait relations. In the sense the United States' national interest is forwarded. But in terms of Taiwan and mainland China, you could make an argument, and I think it's quite a convincing argument, that we have a moderate leadership in Taiwan at the present. President Ma has reached out to the mainland political elites in a way that his predecessor did not. And he needs to be able to negotiate from a position of strength. He cannot negotiate with a gun pointed to his head where he doesn't feel like he has a defensive wherewithal to defend the security of Taiwan.
The Chinese, China mainland, they still are pointing a lot of missiles at Taiwan, right?
Missiles and other military assets. There's been a fairly large and consistent buildup across from Taiwan in Fujian province, what's called the Nanjing Military District. And that has happened for many years, dating back to the late 1990s. And we see, in the United States, China experts generally see that as a destabilizing force. And certainly when I was in the U.S. government, we let the Chinese know we saw it as a destabilizing force. And we believe that Taiwan needs the wherewithal to be able to resist coercion and to negotiate from a position of strength. And there are two reasons. One is the leadership in Taiwan needs to have the psychological confidence to negotiate from a position of strength. But there's also a political component, which is that Taiwan is a democracy. And the top leadership in Taiwan needs to be able to turn to the Taiwan public and say, I am making deals with the mainland because it's in the interest of Taiwan. I am not making deals with the mainland because they are threatening us with force, and I feel compelled to do it for those reasons. And I think that that argument always has to be convincing in a democracy. Otherwise, the public will begin to become suspicious about any deals that President Ma reaches with the mainland.
That's a good point. Good point. So, looking at the agreements and disagreements between the two countries, make us a balance sheet. Are there more agreements than disagreements, or the other way around?
I think on the international stage, there are more bases of agreement than there are bases of disagreement. Where we tend to disagree on the international stage is about which country should do what to help solve common problems. The Chinese government says, for example, that it doesn't want North Korea to have nuclear weapons, and we say we don't want North Korea to have nuclear weapons. And I think both statements are believable. Then the question is, who should do what and when to help press North Korea into the proper posture and to press North Korea to move towards denuclearization? Same thing for Iran. China claims it doesn't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, but we often disagree on issues like UN Security Council sanctions and what should be included in them, and we have to negotiate through that. So there you see differences, but they're differences embedded in a broader agreement about goals. Where we have real differences with China, and there are many differences with China, have to do with the different natures of our political systems. And here, the United States very robustly, and when I was in the government we did it as well, presses China to abide by universal principles of human rights and civil liberties. And this is important that I emphasize its universal principles, because there's a tendency in the United States, sometimes by American citizens, sometimes by American officials, to adopt an attitude that says China should be more like us, or China owes it to the world to do X, Y, or Z. And I think the better way to approach this problem is to say these are universal principles, first and foremost. They're not American principles. And we, in the dialogues that I was participated in on human rights in the government, were very upfront about where we have violated international norms of human rights and how we need to do better. And we opened our discussion in the human rights dialogue along those lines. We mentioned slavery. We mentioned Jim Crow laws. We mentioned that women couldn't vote. And we mentioned Abu Ghraib as examples of violations of human rights by the U.S. government in the past and how the U.S. needs to do better. And then we turned to the issue of China and the many, many areas where we believe China could do better. So that's
how do they respond?
I think our counterparts appreciated the spirit of the presentation that was made, which was to present the problem as we see it as a universal problem, and to basically recognize that there are no perfect countries in the world, and that we all need to work harder. So I think that was appreciated. The second piece that the second piece of our approach was to say that this would be good for China, to liberalize its political system, to open up more space for frustrated Chinese citizens who may be angry about corruption, they may be angry about pollution of their farmland, lack of medical care, et cetera, et cetera. That if they had a voice through peaceful methods, they might have fewer of these violent riots that they have in China. And the Chinese government itself...
Do they agree with you?
I think some do and some don't. The point of these dialogues is often to tap into the debates within China. That's the best we can do. We can't dictate to China how China should behave. But
and
there are lots...
we shouldn't.
And we shouldn't. It's not our place. But what we can do is tap into the debates in China in a way that empowers people who agree with the goals that we have laid out. And there are people in China who, for their own reasons, their own patriotic Chinese reasons, would like to see China's government liberalize, but they believe that it will be a more stable long-term solution to the various problems. And the Chinese government itself has reported as many as 90,000 violent incidents.
Yes, yes, I read about that.
So I think there's real evidence that there may be a better way.
It's been going up like this.
And frustrated citizens who have no other outlet may be more likely to pick up a stick and attack the local party chief than ones that have other outlets for their frustration. So that's the spirit in which we raise that. And we try to encourage the view that China will be stronger, more respected, and more stable. All goals that the Chinese leaders and the Chinese public claim to have if they adopt these methods. And you need to remove the notion that we're urging China to do this because somehow we have a secret strategy of destabilizing China and making it weaker. Something many Chinese sincerely believe, and they need to be disabused of that. Because our policy is not about containing China's growth and keeping China down. It's about shaping the choices that China makes with its influence and encouraging China to create a more long-term, stable, and sustainable growth and opening up the political system at the same time so it isn't subject to shocks, to the types of aggressive, hyper-nationalist outbursts that authoritarian governments sometimes suffer from.
Okay, now I want to talk about how, in your view, is the best way, how we should be managing U.S.-China relations. The Chinese like to do the 3-point thing, 3 no's, 3 yes. Can you give us 3 do's, what we should do, and 3 no's, what we shouldn't do in dealing with China?
Okay. I think that the key thing is something I mentioned earlier, which is I think we need to focus our efforts in China policy on a core principle of trying to encourage a rising China, and China's rising within Asia, and eventually it'll be rising globally. And I think it's more of rising in Asia at present. Encourage that China to use its growing influence in the region and around the world to help solve common problems. And if you take as a baseline, and I do take this as a baseline, that Chinese citizens and elites across the board, across the political spectrum and of all walks of life, would like China to have more prestige and influence on the international stage. Then the question is, how will they achieve that prestige and influence? And that's the key thing that we need to tie into, is the debate about how China will pursue greater prestige and influence on the international stage. And we want to encourage those in China who want to do that through cooperation with other great powers to solve common problems. And we want to discourage those in the debate who want to do that through coercion of neighbors, through solving territorial disputes through the use of force, etc. And that's how we can shape our strategy. So that's the first piece. The second piece would be, which tactics do you raise? A combination of a very strong U.S. military presence in the region, a set of alliances with countries like Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Thailand, and strong U.S. bases in the region, because we want to remind those in China who would argue that China should settle its differences through the use of force and coercion or to bully its neighbors, and there are some, we want to remind them that that would be a very costly enterprise. That helps feed into those debates. The second piece is diplomacy that encourages...
the third piece.
No, the second piece of the tactics. In other words, you have a broad strategy. You're trying to feed into the debates. Then what tactics do you use? What methods do you use to achieve that strategy? And the first piece is a strong military presence. The second is positive diplomacy, which reminds them that that military presence isn't there to harm China, and that we're inviting China to play a larger role on the international stage, which is very different from the Cold War. Rather than keeping China down, we're actually encouraging China to do more, to play a larger role in the six-party talks, in the what's called the P5+1 on Iran, the permanent members of the Security Council plus Germany, on issues like Sudan, Darfur. We want China to do more. We want China to be constructive in the process, but we want China to do more in peacekeeping, in the Gulf of Aden with the piracy issue, where China has deployed a fleet. So you're encouraging China to do more, but to do it in a way that is coordinated with the international community. So that's the second piece. You have positive diplomacy, you have a strong position in the region. And those two things fit together. They don't run in opposite directions. And they're often portrayed as running in the opposite direction.
Now, what about the don'ts? What must we not do?
I think what we must not do is present problems that we have with the Chinese in a way that makes it look like they are American ideals, purely American ideals, not universal ideals, and that China needs to be more in line with the American demands. Because all countries have a degree of patriotism, nationalism, whatever you want to call it. And that approach is always going to lead to a negative reaction. And if you think in terms of the debates that I raised before, there are debates in China about how China should move forward. The worst thing you could do for those who agree with us and the policy prescriptions that we are pushing in our dialogues, the worst thing we could do is to say, what you support is an American position, not a Chinese position. Because that's what their enemies at home are going to be saying. Is you've sold out to the United States. You've become totally Americanized. You've forgotten what it means to be Chinese.
Right, right.
So when we present issues to China or any country as, this is the American way and you should be more American, obviously that is not going to...
They really resent that.
People all around the world resent it.
Yes.
And wouldn't Americans resent it if someone came over and said, you're too American?
I guess that's where we got the name, the ugly American.
Well, some Americans can behave that way. We're not perfect. But I think that the spirit of the diplomacy in which I participated was very much along the lines that I said. You push universal principles. You say that it's not just the United States that wants human rights improvements. The Europeans want it. The Japanese want it. And there are lots of Chinese people. That's the key. Lots of Chinese people who want it. And on security problems, et cetera, you say
I
it's
think
not...
we need to wrap up now.
Okay.
On security issues?
On security issues,
Quickly.
we remind them that it's not just the United States that wants Iran to denuclearize. It's the Europeans, the Japanese, and the entire world. Right? Not just the United States wants North Korea to denuclearize. So in that spirit, you can remind them that this isn't just America dictating, but it's America trying to adopt a constructive diplomatic approach to encourage China to play the role that China could play. And in the process, China will gain the prestige and the respect that people have been pushing for in China all the way back to the Opium War and what's referred to as the century of humiliation in China. And that's the best way for China to achieve its goals, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Professor Christensen. This was conversation with Tom Christensen on China and U.S.-China relations. Thank you for watching and hope to see you next time. This is Mei Chang for International Forum.